Eleanor pressed her palm against the kitchen counter, feeling the cool marble beneath her fingers. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. She glanced at the clock. 7:32 a.m. Her children would soon stir, filling the small New York apartment with the familiar chaos of breakfast, laughter, and the scraping of chairs against linoleum. She took a slow breath, but the calm was deceptive. Morning routines had become mechanical. She sliced toast with precision, poured milk into cups, and set plates in front of her 3 children, Sophie, Aidan, and Lila. Their laughter was bright, yet distant to her ears, as if a thin glass wall separated her from the joy she once felt. She smiled softly, forcing warmth into her voice. "Eat up, darlings. We don't want to be late for school." Her own breakfast, a plain bagel, barely toasted, remained untouched. Eleanor's eyes wandered to the living room, where Michael, her husband, sat slouched on the sofa, staring at the muted morning news. He didn't meet her gaze. Not that he had much lately. His presence was tangible but cold, a shadow she could not reach. "You're quiet today," she said lightly, trying to pierce the fog between them. Michael grunted, "Just thinking." His voice was flat, almost rehearsed. Elena nodded, her chest tightening. It was the same answer she had received for months. "About work?" she asked cautiously. "Yeah, work." He looked away toward the window where sunlight fell unevenly across the floor. The light caught the dust motes, tiny particles floating in the air like suspended secrets. Elena's stomach knotted. She turned back to the children, watching Sophie spill a little juice on the counter. Elena wiped it up, forcing a laugh. "Sophie, careful!" The children giggled, oblivious to the tension thickening the air. But Elena felt it. Every glance Michael avoided, every sigh he let escape unnoticed, it all whispered something she didn't want to hear. Her friends had started noticing the change in her. They asked if everything was okay. "Just tired," she said, dismissing the concern. They didn't see the small, sharp fractures in her life, the silent arguments, the cold meals, the weight of unanswered questions. Even the apartment seemed to reflect her unease. The once bright walls now felt muted, shadows collecting in corners where light didn't reach. Elena walked past the living room again, catching her reflection in the glass of the framed photo above the sofa. Michael's smile, forced but polite, and her own, increasingly strained. She pressed a hand to the glass, as if to hold the image, together, to keep the cracks from widening. The children's laughter reached a peak, shattering the momentary calm. Elena smiled again, this time without warmth, and her hand lingered on the counter, gripping the edge. She thought of Michael's late nights, the way he seemed distant even when he was present. She thought of the fleeting moments of affection, now replaced with silence and sharp glances. She felt a knot in her chest tighten as a thought intruded. Is this how it will always be? Her phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Michael flashed on the screen. "Running late. Don't wait up." She stared at it, the words feeling heavier than they should. A familiar fear settled like ice in her stomach, one she didn't fully understand. She glanced at her children again, laughing and oblivious. Elena felt a pang of guilt. She was meant to be their protector, their safe space. Yet even as she prepared them for school, she couldn't shake the sense that her own world was slipping, that the cracks she could barely see were growing wider as the children lined up to leave, backpacks swinging. Eleanor kissed each forehead, holding them a fraction longer than usual. Michael didn't move from the sofa, eyes still fixed on the muted television. The distance between them was palpable. Elena's mind lingered on the unspoken tension, the invisible fissures in her life. With a sigh, she closed the door behind the children. Alone, she leaned against it, letting herself tremble for a moment. The apartment was silent once more, but this silence was heavy, suffocating, and for the first time in a long while, Elena allowed herself to acknowledge the thought that had been whispering all morning. Something has to change, or it will destroy me. That change, she didn't yet know, would come faster and darker than she could imagine. The apartment felt emptier than usual that evening. Elena sat on the sofa, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, staring at the dim glow of the city lights outside the window. The hum of traffic below reminded her that life went on, indifferent to her unease. Michael was in the kitchen, methodically, preparing dinner, though the rhythm of his movements felt mechanical, almost rehearsed. "Elena," he said abruptly, not looking up, "I need your opinion on something." She turned her head, expecting a question about the children or the apartment, but his tone was cold, detached. "What is it?" she asked cautiously. He held up his phone, showing her a text from a coworker. "This project needs me to stay late tomorrow. I might not make it home in time for dinner." Elena nodded, masking the disappointment that prickled her chest. She had learned long ago that showing emotion around him often led to silence or, worse, subtle reprimands. "Okay," she said softly, her voice trailing as she looked away toward the children's toys scattered across the floor. Michael didn't reply, simply moving back to chopping vegetables. The rhythmic thud of the knife on the cutting board filled the apartment like a metronome marking the passage of a life she barely recognized. Elena sipped her tea, trying to steady her racing thoughts. She remembered the first years of their marriage, laughter spilling into the tiny apartment, shared dreams of vacations and children, nights where conversations stretched until dawn. Those memories felt distant now, as though belonging to someone else's life. Michael's absence had been gradual, a slow erosion she had first dismissed as fatigue, then as stress, and finally as indifference. Later, while folding laundry, Elena noticed something on the floor near Michael's shoes, a faint scent of perfume. She froze, her fingers clutching the folded shirt in her hands. For a moment, she told herself it was nothing, a passing visitor perhaps, or a spill of detergent mixed with fragrance, but the sinking feeling in her chest told her otherwise. Night fell, and the children were tucked into bed. Their soft breathing was a fragile comfort. Eleanor lingered at their door, hand pressed to the wooden frame, listening. The rhythmic rise and fall of their chests offered temporary solace, but it did nothing to still the growing storm inside her. She went to the living room, finding Michael on the sofa again, phone in hand. He didn't look up. "Are you all right?" she asked, testing the waters. "Yes," he said shortly. "Just thinking about work." The lie was thin, brittle. Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to shout, to demand the truth, but words failed. Her! Instead, she sank into the chair across from him, eyes darting around the apartment. The shadows seemed longer tonight, stretching toward her like silent witnesses to the life unraveling before them. Days passed like this. Michael's absences grew longer, his words fewer. Phone calls that once shared warmth now carried only logistics and silence. Elena began noticing the little inconsistencies. His shirt smelled faintly of perfume, a receipt tucked carelessly in a pocket, his hesitation when asked about his day. Each small discovery was a stone added to the weight pressing down on her chest. She tried confronting him gently, asking innocuous questions about work, colleagues, or his schedule. Each time, he deflected with rehearsed answers or quiet irritation. "You're imagining things," he said once, and Elena felt the sting of disbelief and frustration. The accusation, unspoken but present, was worse than any argument. She began questioning herself. Was I overreacting? Late one night, she found herself standing at the window, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. The children slept peacefully behind her, unaware of the tension, unaware of the distance growing between their parents. Eleanor's reflection in the glass stared back at her, pale and tired, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights and worry. She whispered to herself, a prayer or a warning she couldn't tell. Something isn't right, and I need to know the truth. The distance was no longer just physical. It had seeped into every glance, every word, every silence. The once solid foundation of their marriage felt fragile, fractured by things she could not yet name. And with each passing day, Eleanor felt herself standing on the edge of a precipice she didn't know she was approaching, one from which there might be no return. The apartment felt colder that night, though the thermostat read 72 degrees. Elena sat on the edge of their bed, fingers intertwined, staring at the floor. The soft glow of the city lights filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch toward her, as if the walls themselves were listening. Michael entered the bedroom, his expression unreadable. He didn't greet her. He simply dropped his briefcase onto the floor with a dull thud. "We need to talk," he said, voice low, careful. Elena's chest tightened. She had been anticipating this moment, dreading it, yet part of her had clung to hope that it might never come. "About—" Her voice was hesitant, fragile. "Us," he said. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing for a moment before sitting, on the edge of the bed. "I can't do this anymore. I'm thinking of leaving." The words fell like stones in her chest. She felt her stomach twist, nausea rising, but she forced herself to remain standing. "Leaving? You mean leaving me?" Her voice trembled despite her efforts. "Yes," he admitted, his gaze fixed on the floor. I met someone else. Claire. I didn't plan for this to happen, but it did. And I can't stay in a marriage that feels broken." Elena's knees weakened. She sank onto the bed, clutching the sheets as though holding onto some fragile tether to reality. "You can't," she whispered, almost pleading. We have the children. They need us." "They'll be fine," Michael said flatly. "You're their mother and you're capable. But I can't stay. I'm sorry." Her mind reeled, spinning with disbelief and rage. She wanted to scream, to beg, to strike, but none of those impulses felt enough. Instead, a cold, creeping fear settled over her. If he leaves, everything I built, everything I am, disappears. She remembered their life together, the small victories, the birthdays, the late-night talks. Those moments now felt taunting, cruel reminders of what she might lose. The children's laughter, once a balm, now echoed in her mind with a hollow edge. Without him, they might be gone too. Everything might be gone. Michael stood, his shadow stretching over her like a spectre. "I need to sleep," he muttered, heading toward the door. Elena's hand shot out, gripping his sleeve. "Please, talk to me. Just don't leave like this." He paused, sighing, shaking his head. "There's nothing to talk about. I've made up my mind." And then he left, the click of the door reverberating through the apartment like a gunshot. Elena stayed where she was, trembling, her thoughts colliding in the dark. The city hummed outside, indifferent to the fracture that had formed in her life. She thought of the children upstairs, their soft breaths, their innocence. The fear of losing them, of losing everything, gnawed at her, relentless and raw. Hours passed. Sleep did not come. Eleanor moved to the living room, curling into the sofa, her mind replaying Michael's words like a looped recording. He's leaving. He loves someone else. He might take the children. Panic rose in her chest, hot and suffocating. She imagined scenarios she could barely admit to herself. The children crying for their father, Michael smiling at Claire, the life she knew vanishing. The anxiety became whispers in the dark, voices of doubt and paranoia threading through her mind. What if I can't protect them? What if I lose them? By the time dawn crept through the curtains, Eleanor had not moved from the sofa. Her eyes were red, her body stiff, but the quiet had only sharpened her thoughts. She could not accept a life where Michael left without a fight, without her having some measure of control. Her reflection in the window caught her attention. A pale face, dark circles under her eyes, lips pressed tight with fear and anger. The city outside continued its indifferent rhythm. Inside, a storm brewed. She did not yet know what form it would take, only that it was inevitable, that something inside her had shifted, and with that shift came a quiet, terrifying resolve. If she could not keep her family together, if the distance between them grew any wider, she would find a way to stop it, no matter the cost. The children slept upstairs, unaware of the tension that now dominated the apartment. Michael had gone, to work that morning as if nothing had changed. Elena, however, knew that nothing would ever be the same. The apartment smelled faintly of burnt toast and coffee, but Elena barely noticed. Her hands shook as she scrolled through Michael's phone, a trembling curiosity she hadn't dared indulge before. The screen lit up with messages between him and someone named Claire. At first, she told herself she was imagining it, just work talk, casual flirting. But the words on the screen were unmistakable. Heartbeats skipped, nausea rose. She's not just a co-worker, she's someone else, someone he loves. Elena sank onto the kitchen chair, the weight of the revelation pressing her down. How could he? She whispered, voice breaking. Her children were in the next room, their laughter faint through the thin walls. The sound that once brought her comfort now felt like a reminder of betrayal. Michael came home later that evening, the faint scent of cologne lingering on his clothes, different from his usual. Elena waited until he was in the living room, pretending to sort through mail, her pulse racing. She didn't confront him immediately. She needed to hear the truth from his own mouth. He noticed her staring. "What is it?" he asked cautiously. Elena held up his phone, trembling. "These texts. Who is Claire?" Michael sighed, a long, drawn-out exhale that sounded almost tired. "Elena, it's not what you think." Her laugh was sharp, bitter. "Not what I think. She's in your messages. You're planning to leave me for her. How is that not what I think?" He looked away, avoiding her gaze. I didn't plan for this. It just happened. I care about her." Eleanor's chest constricted. She wanted to scream, to throw the phone, to shake him until he admitted everything. But instead, a cold, quiet fury settled in her. Care about her? What about us? What about the children? "They'll be fine," he said, his voice flat. "I'm sorry, Eleanor. I didn't want it to happen this way, but it did." The words hit like ice. Eleanor felt herself shrinking, curling into a space where fear and rage coexisted uncomfortably. She wanted to reach him, to make him understand that she was still here, still fighting, but he had already stepped away in spirit. His presence, once a source of stability, now felt alien, like a stranger living under the same roof. Night fell, and the apartment seemed to close in on her. Eleanor wandered through the rooms, touching objects that had once been familiar. The children's toys, the framed photographs, the little socks left by the bed, all reminders of a life she feared. She was losing. The air felt thick, heavy with the unspoken truths that now filled the spaces between her and Michael. She remembered the first time he smiled at her after the affair began. A smile that once reassured her now felt like a betrayal, a signal of intimacy shared with someone else. Her mind spiraled, imagining Claire in their home, hearing Michael laugh, sharing what she used to share. The jealousy burned, sharp and unrelenting, yet mingled with despair, a despair she couldn't voice. Later, she sat by the children's room, listening to their soft breathing. Tears fell silently as she traced their faces in the dim light. If I can't hold him here, if I can't protect them from losing him, what do I do? The question echoed through her mind, unanswerable and terrifying. She tried speaking to Michael again, but each conversation ended in gaslighting. You're imagining things, he told her once, his tone casual, almost mocking. You're too emotional. Calm down. His words sank like stones into her chest. Eleanor began to doubt herself, doubting the very reality she saw. The betrayal felt real, but so did his insistence that she was overreacting. The apartment was silent once more, but Eleanor's mind raced with fragmented thoughts and images, Claire's name in texts, Michael's dismissive tone, the children's laughter mingling with the echoes of her own fear. She realized that her world had shifted irreversibly. The person she thought she knew, the life she had built, was no longer within her grasp. And in that quiet, suffocating darkness, a seed of resolve planted itself. She would not let him take everything, not her children, not her life. Something inside her whispered a dangerous thought, one that promised control, one that offered an answer to the fear gnawing at her heart. Eleanor didn't know how far she would go, only that she could not remain passive. The apartment felt smaller now, as if the walls themselves were leaning inward, suffocating her. Elena moved from room to room, picking up toys, folding laundry, rearranging items in a futile attempt to impose order on a life that had grown chaotic overnight. Michael was at work, his absence stretching longer with each passing day, and the quiet left space for her thoughts to spiral unchecked. She stopped at the window, staring at the city skyline. Neon lights flickered against the darkened streets, indifferent to her torment. Her reflection stared back at her, pale, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, lips pressed tight with tension. She barely recognized herself anymore. The laughter of her children echoed in her ears, simultaneously comforting and cruel, a reminder of what she still had and what she could lose. Friends had begun to call less frequently. When she answered the phone, she forced a cheerful tone, hiding the anxiety clawing at her insides. "I'm fine," she lied, over and over. In their absence, Elena's thoughts roamed unchecked, circling Michael's betrayal like a predator, tracking prey. Each imagined scenario twisted her stomach with dread, him laughing with Claire, holding her children in his arms, erasing the life they had shared. Elena tried to reach Michael, sending messages she knew might go unanswered. He would reply with brief, detached sentences, almost like a stranger addressing her. He's already gone, she thought bitterly, and in his absence, the apartment seemed to close in on her further. Every corner shadowed, every familiar object a reminder of the fracture growing between them. At night, Elena found herself standing at the door of the children's room, listening to their soft breathing. She would press a hand to the door, feeling the vibrations of life within, and imagine scenarios she dared not voice, leaving them, taking them, losing them. Each thought sent a chill through her body, her mind stretching reality and fear into an indistinguishable tangle. She began to notice the subtle signs of her unraveling. Her hands shook when she touched Michael's belongings, her chest constricted whenever she imagined his laughter with another woman. Shadows in the hallway seemed to lengthen deliberately, creeping closer, almost whispering accusations. Eleanor whispered back to them, threats that never left her lips. "You will not take them. You will not leave me alone." Even the children became instruments of her anxiety. Sophie's questions about school, Aidan's scraped knee, Lila's soft cries, they tugged at her heart, but also at her fear. She clung to them, their dependence her lifeline, but also the chains binding her to a reality she could not escape. She imagined Michael taking them away, leaving her alone in a house that felt increasingly like a cage. Sleep offered no respite. She would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of traffic and imagining whispers of betrayal. In every creak of the floorboards, Michael's voice echoed in her mind, calm and detached, dismissing her feelings, telling her she was overreacting. The gaslighting gnawed at her confidence, leaving her vulnerable to her own growing obsession with control. In her rare moments of quiet, Eleanor traced the apartment with her eyes, noting every corner, every shadow. The walls, once neutral, now felt like silent witnesses to her unraveling. Each object seemed loaded with meaning. The framed photographs of family outings, the children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, Michael's neatly folded shirts, all reminders of a life that existed without certainty. By the time evening came, she felt exhausted, yet restless, unable to sit or move with purpose. She paced the living room, glancing at the clock, at the unopened letters, at the children's toys scattered across the floor. The apartment had become a pressure cooker of anxiety, betrayal, and unspoken rage. Alone, Eleanor realized that isolation had become her companion. With friends distant and Michael emotionally unavailable, the apartment's walls seemed to lean closer each day. Her fear and desperation had grown into something tangible, almost living, shaping her thoughts and actions in ways she could neither fully comprehend nor resist. And in the quiet corners of the apartment, amidst the shadows and stillness, Eleanor understood that the next choice she made could change everything, forever. The apartment was quiet, but Eleanor could feel it breathing around her. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint hum from the refrigerator seemed amplified in the stillness, echoing the unrest inside her. She moved slowly through the rooms, touching surfaces as if to confirm that the world was still there, still real. Yet every glance reminded her of the fissures she could no longer ignore. Her children's laughter and chatter had become distant, almost dreamlike, a memory she clung to yet feared would vanish. She would watch Sophie drawing pictures at the kitchen table, Aidan building towers from blocks, Lila stacking cups, and feel a tightening in her chest. The joy they brought her was inseparable from the fear that it could be taken away at any moment. Elena's mind began to replay Michael's words on an endless loop. "I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving." The repetition gnawed at her sanity, twisting his casual detachment into threats and accusations. Every gesture, every smile he gave his children or spoke in passing became proof of a betrayal she could not forgive. She whispered under her breath, barely audible, "I can't let it happen. I won't let it happen." The shadows in the apartment seemed alive. A corner of the living room caught her eye, and she imagined shapes moving just beyond her vision. Whispers seemed to rise from the walls, accusing, reminding, demanding. Elena clutched her arms around herself, rocking slightly, trying to ground herself, but the fear and anger coursed too fiercely. She imagined Michael walking through the rooms with Claire, touching the children, laughing with a freedom she had never felt since discovering the affair. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Her nightly walks to the children's rooms became ritualistic. She would press a hand to each door, listening to their breathing, counting heartbeats, memorizing the rise and fall of their chests. She imagined scenarios that made her stomach churn, them crying out for a father who no longer belonged to her, Michael choosing Claire over her, over them. Every image stoked the flames of desperation burning in her chest. Elena's sleep dissolved into fragments of dreams and nightmares, blending reality and imagination. In one, Michael left the apartment carrying their children, Claire smiling at him, and Elena screamed, but the sound never reached anyone's ears. She awoke drenched in sweat, heart pounding, the apartment silent but accusatory. She would lie in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction, every omission, every tiny sign she might have missed. Her hands began to shake more frequently. She knocked over a cup while pouring tea, spilled cereal on the floor, and felt rage rise at her own clumsiness. The apartment, once a home, now felt like a cage filled with invisible enemies. Every glance at Michael's folded clothes, every photograph on the wall, seemed to pulse with accusation. She muttered to herself, barely coherent, "He can't take them. He can't. I won't let him." Even the children sensed the tension, though they could not name it. Sophie asked why Mommy looked sad. Aidan wondered why she sometimes cried while folding his clothes. Eleanor's heart ached. She hugged them tighter, forcing smiles, hiding the storm inside her. But the internal pressure continued to build, quiet yet relentless, and the apartment's walls seemed to shrink around her, compressing her thoughts into dangerous clarity. By late night, she would pace again, whispering to the empty rooms, her voice a mixture of fear, rage, and pleading. The silence responded with nothing but echoes, reinforcing her isolation, feeding the obsession that had taken root. If I lose them, I lose everything. If he leaves, it's over. I must protect them, no matter what it takes. Elena didn't sleep that night, nor the next, nor the one after. Her mind sharpened, focused, yet unhinged. She traced paths through the apartment, memorized routines, catalogued potential threats. Every small sound, the children's breathing, a car horn outside, the tick of the clock, felt like a signal, a warning that the life she clung to could be taken in an instant. And in the quiet, between her whispers and the shadows, Eleanor felt the stirrings of a resolution, a grim, terrible certainty that the only way to protect her world, her children, her fragile sense of control, was to act. Soon, before it was too late. The city was asleep, but Eleanor lay wide-eyed in bed, her thoughts weaving into restless knots. Michael's steady breathing beside her felt foreign, like the rhythm of a stranger's life intruding into her room. She had hoped the night would grant her clarity, that sleep would smooth the jagged edges of doubt. Instead, darkness only amplified them. Her phone glowed faintly on the nightstand. A message from Grace earlier still lingered, unanswered. "We need to talk, not tomorrow. Tonight if you can." Elena hadn't replied, torn between fear and necessity. What was Grace so desperate to say that couldn't wait? At dawn, Elena rose quietly, leaving Michael asleep. The floorboards groaned under her feet like guilty whispers. She slipped into the kitchen, wrapped her hands around a cup of coffee, and stared out the window as the sun painted streaks of grey across the sky. Her reflection on the glass startled her. The woman staring back looked older, thinner, her eyes carrying shadows too heavy for her frame. Was this who she had become? A ghost of herself, while pretending everything was fine. By mid-morning, she forced herself through routine. Packing, lunches, checking homework, reminding Sophie about her jacket. The motions felt rehearsed, automatic, like she was acting in a play where she no longer remembered the plot. Michael moved through the kitchen without a word, grabbing his keys, his cologne lingering long after he'd left. Grace called. Eleanor hesitated before answering. "Eleanor," Grace's voice trembled slightly, as though she'd been pacing. "Can we meet today? Please, it's important." Eleanor's heart sank. "What's going on?" "Not over the phone. Just the cafe near the park. Noon." After dropping the kids at school, Elena drove toward the cafe. The air carried the faint bite of winter approaching, the kind that seeps into bones before it ever snows. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, her knuckles pale. Grace was already waiting at a corner table, her expression guarded but urgent. She reached for Eleanor's hand almost immediately, her touch firm. "There's something I should have told you weeks ago," Grace began. Her eyes darted toward the window, scanning the sidewalk as if afraid someone might be listening. "I didn't know how, but now, I think you need to hear it." Eleanor's pulse raced. "Grace, you're scaring me." Grace exhaled shakily. "It's about Michael." The name dropped like a stone between them. Eleanor leaned in, her voice sharp. "What about him?" Grace hesitated. "I've seen him. With someone. More than once." Eleanor froze, the words slicing into her like glass. She wanted to laugh, to deny it outright, but Grace's steady gaze left no room for illusions. "Are you saying—" "Yes," Grace whispered. "I'm so sorry. I thought maybe it was a colleague, something innocent, but it wasn't. I saw them at a hotel. Eleanor, it wasn't a mistake." The cafe's chatter blurred into a low hum. Eleanor's throat tightened, her breath shallow. Images flashed in her mind. Michael's late nights, the cold distance in his eyes, the phone turned face down on the counter. Signs she had ignored because love, or fear, demanded blindness. She pulled her hand back slowly. "You're sure?" Wouldn't have told you if I wasn't. I know what this means, but you deserve the truth. Eleanor sat back, her chair scraping softly against the floor. She stared at the swirl of coffee in her cup, wishing it could drown out the truth now lodged inside her chest. The drive home was a blur. She walked through the front door in a daze, the house too quiet, every silence suddenly suspicious. In the hallway mirror, she saw her reflection again. Only now, the cracks were undeniable. That evening, Michael returned as usual, his tie loosened, his smile rehearsed. "Long day," he muttered, placing his briefcase by the door. Elena studied. Him, every gesture magnified, every word weighted with hidden meaning. She forced her lips into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Dinner's almost ready." The children's laughter floated from the living room, a fragile shield against the storm rising between their parents. Eleanor set the table, her hands trembling. Every clink of cutlery felt like a countdown, every glance at Michael like a test she wasn't ready to grade. She didn't confront him. Not yet. The truth sat heavy on her tongue, but her silence became armor. She would not rush. Not until she understood what came next. Later, when the children were asleep, she lingered in the kitchen while Michael scrolled through his phone. The glow of the screen illuminated his face, but his eyes seemed far away. Elena whispered to herself, barely audible, "I know." He didn't hear her. Upstairs, she shut the bedroom door behind her and leaned against it, heart pounding. The world she had built was no longer whole, but she wasn't ready to let it collapse, at least not yet. For the first time, she understood. The cracks weren't just in the glass, they were in everything. The night air in Manhattan had a peculiar stillness. Eleanor sat by the window of her bedroom, the city lights flickering like restless fireflies in the distance. Her body felt heavy, but her mind was a storm that refused to calm. The memory of Ava's warning replayed in her head. Michael at the bar, whispering in shadows, secrets sliding between clenched teeth. She wanted to dismiss it. She wanted to believe that Ava was wrong, that maybe she had misunderstood, but a seed of suspicion had already been planted, and it grew with every passing second. Michael walked into the room, loosening his tie. He carried the smell of his cologne, sharp and layered with the faint trace of alcohol. His eyes flickered toward Elena, then away, as though she were a piece of furniture he had outgrown. "You're up late," he said flatly, pulling off his cufflinks. "I couldn't sleep," she answered. Her voice carried a weight she couldn't disguise. Michael didn't notice, or maybe he did, and chose not to respond. Silence pressed between them like a third presence. Eleanor studied him, watching the slight tremor in his hand as he reached for the lamp, the tightening of his jaw when her gaze lingered too long. She wondered if he could sense the shift in her, the crack in her quiet compliance. "Everything okay?" she asked softly, testing him. He gave her a quick glance, his expression unreadable. "Of course, why wouldn't it be?" She opened her mouth but stopped herself. If she pushed too hard, he would retreat, and the walls between them would thicken. Yet saying nothing felt like a betrayal of her own instincts. When he turned off the lamp and settled into bed, Eleanor lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling. The rhythm of his breathing eventually grew steady, but her mind spiraled. Images collided. Ava's words, the hollow look in Michael's eyes, the flicker of something unsaid every time he touched his phone. By morning, she had made a decision. Elena found herself walking the streets near Michael's office later that week, her heart pounding with every step. She felt foolish, like a character in a bad drama, but she couldn't ignore the gnawing in her gut. She ducked into a cafe across from the building and ordered coffee she barely touched. Her eyes stayed fixed on the glass doors. At first, there was nothing unusual. Suits moving in and out, the usual rush of New York life. Then she saw him. Michael emerged with a woman at his side, not just a colleague. Elena could tell by the way he leaned in, his hand grazing the woman's elbow with a casual intimacy that didn't belong to strangers. The woman laughed, her head tilting back slightly, the sound carried even across the street. Michael smiled, a smile Elena hadn't seen directed at her in years. Her heart stopped. The world seemed to shrink until there was nothing but the two of them in that moment, walking away together, leaving her breathless on the other side of the glass. Elena sat frozen, her coffee untouched, her hands trembling against the table. It wasn't proof, not yet. Maybe it was innocent, she told herself. Maybe she was imagining the undertones. But deep inside, she knew. Something in her chest cracked, and the sound of it echoed through every corner of her being. That night, Michael returned home later than usual. He muttered something about a meeting running long, his eyes darting away from hers. Eleanor nodded, forcing a smile, her chest burning with words she couldn't release. She wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but fear gripped her. What if he lied? Worse, what if he told the truth? So instead, she played her role. She set the table, listened to the children chatter, and laughed at the right moments. But inside, she was unraveling. Every gesture, every silence between them was now colored with doubt. Later, as Michael showered, she stood in the doorway of their bedroom, staring at his phone resting on the nightstand. It pulsed once with a notification, the screen lighting, up with a name she didn't recognize. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She reached for it, her hand hovering, trembling. She wasn't ready. Not yet. Pulling back, she whispered to herself, "Tomorrow." The word hung in the air, heavy with both fear and resolve, as the sound of running water masked the thundering of her heart. The apartment was silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Elena sat on the edge of the sofa, her eyes fixed on Michael's phone resting on the nightstand. She had waited until he was showering, a thin veil of water masking the rhythm of his breathing, until the world outside their walls seemed distant and irrelevant. Her hand hovered over the device. A single notification pulsed in the dim light, a name she didn't recognize. She told herself this wasn't real. She told herself she might be imagining it, but the gnawing in her chest demanded proof, demanded clarity, demanded answers. Finally, she swiped the screen. Messages spilled across it. Intimate, familiar, taunting. Claire, the woman she had glimpsed from the cafe. Each text was a thread, unraveling a carefully woven lie. Flirtation, laughter, inside jokes, plans that excluded her, moments shared with Michael that should have been hers alone. Elena felt her stomach twist, bile rising. She read and reread the messages, each one cutting deeper than the last. Michael had not only betrayed her emotionally, but had been meticulous, secretive, leaving almost no evidence of the depth of his involvement. A text pinged as she stared, frozen. "Can't wait to see you tonight." Alone, her hands shook violently. The children's laughter upstairs, once a balm, now rang like a cruel reminder. Her mind reeled with images of them, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the roof they trusted. She pressed her palms to her face, inhaling sharply, trying to steady her racing heart. How could he do this? Her voice was barely a whisper, a thread of sound swallowed by the quiet. Her thoughts looped. The late nights, the cold silences, the subtle excuses, the perfume she had noticed on his jacket. Everything, every small detail she had brushed aside, now formed a damning picture of betrayal. She put the phone down for a moment, leaning back against the sofa, eyes closing. A headache pulsed at her temples, a sharp reminder that her body had been carrying the weight of this storm for weeks. But no rest would come. Sleep had abandoned her long ago. Her mind began connecting the dots, the psychological web of deceit stretching before her. Michael had been distant, gaslighting her, manipulating reality in subtle ways. Every dismissal of her concerns now felt like premeditation. a way to maintain control while plotting a life that excluded her. Elena rose and moved silently to the children's room. Sophie and Aidan slept tangled in blankets, Lila's small hand resting on the pillow. She traced their faces, memorizing each detail, the curve of their lips, the rise and fall of their breathing, the innocence in their features. Her chest tightened painfully. I won't let anyone take them from me. Not him, not anyone. The thought lingered, dark and insistent. A storm was brewing in her mind, one that had been gestating for weeks, fed by betrayal and isolation. The rational part of her mind screamed against it, warning her that anger and fear were dangerous companions, yet the emotional side, the side that had lain dormant beneath routines and smiles, was awakening with terrifying clarity. Back in the living room, she picked up the phone again, scanning the messages for patterns, locations, plans. Each discovery fueled her obsession, sharpening her focus. Every detail of Michael's affair now felt like ammunition in a silent war she had never intended to fight, but which she realized she could not ignore. The apartment felt smaller, the walls pressing closer. Shadows seemed to reach for her, amplifying the pulse of her own desperation. She whispered to herself, almost in chant, "I have to protect them. I can't fail. I won't fail." She moved to the bedroom, phone in hand, pacing in the dim light. The gravity of the situation pressed on her chest, and yet a strange clarity emerged. Action, not waiting, would be the only way to reclaim control. She didn't yet know the form it would take, only that hesitation was no longer an option. The water in the bathtub reflected the faint glow of the ceiling light, catching her attention. She ran her fingers along its edge, imagining, dangerously, the possibilities, the power, the control. She shook her head, pushing the thought away, but it lingered like a shadow at the edges of her mind. Elena sank into a chair, gripping the phone tightly. The reality of Michael's betrayal was undeniable now, and the world she had known, her marriage, her trust, the fragile sense of safety, had fractured irreparably. "Tomorrow," she whispered, her voice tight with resolve. "Tomorrow, everything changes." The apartment was cloaked in silence, the kind that presses against the ears and fills every empty corner. Elena moved carefully, her footsteps muffled against the carpet. The children slept upstairs, blissfully unaware of the storm that had taken residence in their home. Michael was at work, his presence absent, but his betrayal looming like a spectre in every room. Elena's hands trembled as she gathered the pieces of her fractured life. Her eyes fell on the bathtub in the bathroom, its smooth porcelain surface, gleaming faintly under the overhead light. She traced the edge with her fingertips, the coldness grounding her, sharpening her resolve. She sat on the edge of the tub, phone in hand, replaying Michael's messages, the pictures from the cafe, the texts that confirmed his affair. The evidence was irrefutable. His lies, his dismissals, his hidden smiles, they had all been real, deliberate, orchestrated. Rage and despair fused into a singular, consuming force. "I won't let him take them from me," she whispered, voice barely audible, yet firm. "I won't let him." Her thoughts spun, visions of her children's innocence colliding with Michael's betrayal. She imagined them crying for their father, reaching out to someone who had already chosen another. The fear clawed at her chest, sharp and relentless. Every heartbeat amplified the urgency, the need for action. She moved to the children's room, watching them sleep. Sophie's small hand rested on her pillow, Aidan's face pressed against his blanket. Lila's soft breathing rhythmic and steady. Elena knelt by the bed, brushing their hair back from their faces. Her lips trembled. "I'll protect you," she murmured. "No one will take you from me." The words, once comforting, now carried an edge of determination that startled her. She returned to the bathroom, pacing, her mind calculating, planning, weighing possibilities she had never imagined before. Shadows from the window stretched across the room, twisting like dark fingers, echoing the storm within her. She remembered Michael's face, the casual way he had dismissed her, The way he had smiled at Claire, and a cold clarity crystallized. He can't have them. Not like this. Minutes passed, or hours. Time had become meaningless. Every small sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the floorboards, the distant traffic, felt amplified, a reminder of the fragility of her world. She gripped the edge of the bathtub, knuckles white, staring at her reflection in the mirrored wall. Her reflection stared back, pale and tense, eyes wide with fear and determination. She whispered again, this time louder, more resolutely. I won't let them leave me. The weight of weeks of betrayal, fear, and isolation pressed down on her. Every sleepless night, every whispered doubt, every ignored instinct had led her here, to a precipice where choice and consequence blurred. She realized that hesitation was a luxury she no longer possessed. The phone buzzed with a notification from Michael, a brief text confirming his late return. Not that it matters, she thought. Her gaze returned to the children's room, to the innocence she could not bear to lose, and a dark resolve settled fully within her. Elena filled the bathtub with water, each pour sounding unnervingly loud in the quiet apartment. She watched it swirl, calm on the surface, yet holding potential she could barely admit. Her mind raced, considering impossibilities, weighing what she believed was necessary to maintain control over the life she had left. She imagined Michael walking through the door, laughing with Claire, and her chest tightened. The fantasy of protection, of reclaiming a world that had slipped from her grasp, became dangerously tangible. The lines between fear and action, between thought and deed, blurred into a single, unyielding current. Elena sat by the tub, eyes fixed on the water. Her breaths came in shallow, rapid bursts. The apartment seemed to hold its own breath with her, waiting, watching, amplifying the tension. She whispered one last time, almost as a vow, almost as a warning. I will not let them go. I will not let him take them. The water rippled slightly, catching the dim glow of the overhead light, reflecting a fractured image of a woman pushed to her limits. Every ounce of her love, her fear, her rage, coalesced into the decision that would mark the moment where everything changed. And in that quiet, suffocating apartment, Elena understood with chilling certainty the next move she made could not be undone. Night had fallen, and the apartment was cloaked in shadows. Elena moved silently. The soft carpet under her feet muted her steps as if the house itself conspired with her. She paused outside the children's room, listening to their breathing. Each inhale, each exhale, became a lifeline, a fragile tether that anchored her to purpose and fear alike. Her hands shook, though she tried to steady them, gripping the edge of the bathtub as she had countless times before. The water inside rippled, slightly with each movement, reflecting the dim glow of the hallway light. In her mind, the boundaries between love, fear, and rage had blurred entirely. She whispered their names softly, over and over, as if repeating a prayer could fortify her resolve. Sophie, Aidan, Lila. The phone buzzed on the counter, but she ignored it. Michael's late return would come soon. The thought of him stepping through the door, igniting both dread and determination. Each passing second felt like a countdown, a drumbeat to the climax she had been edging toward for weeks. Elena's mind raced, replaying every insult, every cold dismissal, every secret smile she had glimpsed on Michael's face. She saw him with Claire at the cafe, with Claire in the hotel, with Claire in messages that confirmed what her gut had known all along. Betrayal, meticulously concealed, had carved a canyon between them, and she stood on one edge, teetering, on the brink. She moved to the living room window, staring out at the city below. Lights flickered in apartment after apartment, strangers unaware of the storm brewing behind her walls. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and taut, eyes wide with a mix of fear and resolve. I can't fail them. I won't fail them. The children stirred slightly in their sleep, murmuring in voices soft and trusting. Eleanor pressed a finger to her lips, bending over to smooth a blanket over Sophie. Every movement was careful, deliberate, as if one wrong gesture might shatter the fragile equilibrium of her plan. Her gaze fell again to the bathtub. The water gleamed, calm and inviting in its own ominous way. Her thoughts flitted dangerously, visualizing a world where she could control everything, protect them entirely, and reclaim the life Michael had begun to dismantle. Every rational voice in her head urged caution, yet the emotional currents that had built over months of isolation, betrayal, and fear drowned out reason. A noise from the hallway snapped her attention toward the door. Her chest tightened. Michael's key rattled in the lock, and her pulse surged. The man who had been both love and betrayal was about to walk back into the orbit of the life he had fractured. Elena gripped the edge of the bathtub, knuckles white, her mind straining to anticipate his steps, his words, his reactions. Michael entered, removing his coat with casual indifference. "I'm home," he said, almost cheerfully, though his eyes flicked briefly toward hers, wary, perhaps sensing the tension she carried. Elena forced herself to smile, a tight, careful smile that hid the maelstrom roiling beneath. "Dinner's ready soon," she said quietly, voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. He nodded, unaware, or choosing to ignore, the invisible storm that had taken residence in her. The children called from their rooms, voices bright and innocent, pulling him toward the bedrooms in a carefree way. Elena followed quietly, watching every gesture, every small interaction. Her mind raced. Each laugh, each innocent question, each smile from the children became proof of what she was fighting for and what she could not lose. The combination of love, fear, and betrayal compressed her resolve into something dangerously tangible. Later, as Michael settled in the living room, Elena moved again to the bathroom. She ran her fingers along the water's edge, feeling the coldness anchor her thoughts. Her breath came in shallow bursts, heart hammering with the gravity of the decision. She had been circling for weeks,